Tahera Zamanzada is Executive Advisor at SAP. Brian Laird is Executive Advisor at SAP as well. Welcome to both of you. Tahera, I start with you. How are you seeing agencies shifting from services-led infrastructures to AI standards-based infrastructures?
So what we're finding is a lot of agencies are moving away from the large, clunky, customized systems that took years and years to build out and a lot of taxpayer dollars. And now the standards-based architecture, like the one that we've built in SAP's S/4HANA, allows our customers and the federal agencies to be able to build and scale standards-based architecture much more easily. The reason why is because we actually build the industry best practices within our product suite and within our platform. And then when AI is a part of the system, it's actually a connective tissue, almost like a nervous system. It's not just bolted on top. Because of that, you're able to take advantage of modernization efforts much more faster, much more scalable, and you're able to reduce technical debt and the amount of people that work on a project.
Brian, welcome. It's great to have you here
Thank you.
too. What are you seeing as you go into organizations like federal agencies that are doing what Tahira just suggested and seeing where they're starting from versus where they're trying to get to?
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic. What Tahera said is absolutely correct. What we want to do is a shared services architecture, but they did not evolve that way.
Mm.
Traditionally, when you look at the federal space, both defense side and the civilian side, what you see is a lot of architectures, even solutions being built on independent siloed problems that made sense for them at the time. They had an individual solution, they had an individual problem, and they implemented it the way they wanted to. But as we actually look at the industry itself, what we've acknowledged is that at the level 1 and 2, a lot of the processes across finance, HR, procurement are generally the same, right? If I'm in the procurement side, I'm trying to do a acquire to retire. If I'm in the HR side, I'm hiring to retiring. If I'm in the supply chain, I'm planning to stock. The problem that we have though is those systems originated to solve individual problem and may have been good for the individual agency, subcomponent, or defense entity at the time, but really sub-optimized the broader ecosystem. So now the buying power of the government is really now stuck in functional technical debt across a numerous different systems. So what we try to do from the shared perspective is how do we find success in one agency and to be able to replicate that across via shared service.
What are you finding when these organizations try to make these transformations from the agency perspective?
Mhm.
Are they peeling back layers of legacy, or are they thinking more about how do we just kind of unplug the legacy, plug in this new shared services model?
So typically we see it the latter, right? What we do is we typically see, and it doesn't always work, is we see people try to do a big bang transformation.
Mm-hmm.
They try to implement technology. Usually what I advise folks is we've seen via academic research, we've seen via observation, and we've seen, just through plain experience that does not work. It takes protracted, because organizations themselves are living entities, the organisms essentially, where very dynamic and there's a lot of external forces that take place. When you try to do this kind of transformation, it takes protracted time.
Mm-hmm.
Leadership tends to turn over, employees attrit, credibility kind of deep dives the wrong way. So what we try to do is we talk to people about, instead of doing it the way what you described, where we're trying to do this whole implementation via technology, let's start small and pilot somewhere. So let's look at a low risk, high volume area where I can maybe implement a piece of technology, whether it's a shared service or an AI, give incremental capability to those users, see if I'm successful, iterate on it, and then they can actually start scaling to other sides. That's the piece that's way more successful than we've seen people just trying to implement it through technology and hope people buy into it.
Here, something you talked about earlier, I think, is really interesting too. You talked about the concept of building artificial intelligence applications into these transformations. And I imagine that's especially difficult given what we just heard for organizations because the technology is so new. What have you seen agencies do that's been successful to make that conversion with stuff they already have, because they have to keep the system operating at the same time they're undertaking the transformation that we're here to talk about?
Yep, absolutely. So for me, progress over perfection. Your data is never going to be completely clean. The best thing you can do right now is just start piloting, whether it's a high volume use case where you can actually use the AI to be able to determine what the data quality gaps are. I would encourage customers to do that. Where folks are failing is they're thinking, I have to have my data completely clean and ready to go before I'm able to pilot some of these AI projects. You don't need to do that. A lot of the solutions that have the AI embedded within it allow you to pilot 1, 2, 3 different projects at a time. High value processes should go in first. And after that, then you'll see what you want to keep and what you want to remove. That's super easy.
Hmm. What are organizations learning as they're doing those data scrubs and processing what they have to see what their gaps are?
What they're learning is there's a lot of parallel projects going on that are essentially the same type of project. Imagine if you're in procurement and you're seeing duplicative data entries over and over again in multiple systems. As you're surfacing those data quality gaps with AI, you're able to reduce your technical debt, but also maybe find a little bit of extra dollars to put in on a new project as opposed to the multiple systems doing the same type of work.
Brian, do you see a lot of redundancy in the way that Tahira just described?
Absolutely. I think we see that both in the public side when it comes to the federal civilian, and I think we see it both on the defense side as well. Where I totally agree with Tahir. I think what at some point I had an old boss that used to talk about we're not going to fail because we didn't achieve. We're going to fail because we failed to learn,
Mm.
right? So I think without actually going ahead and trying these pilots, you're not going to figure out what you need to do until you go through that process. There is a learning curve that happens naturally and organically that has to be sustained. So I totally agree with Tahir. I think one thing I would add though is when you look at these organizations and they pilot, there's certainly a data uh, challenge when it comes to data cleansing, structured versus unstructured data. But what really fascinates me is when you look at the workforce in general today, the amount of data that is out there compared to where it was yesterday is just proliferating in a number of different ways. So the data is there in some sort of fashion.
Mm.
I think when you look at self-service tools for analytics, they're just starting to proliferate to the point where it's on every person's desktop. And I think from an employee perspective, where it was even 5, 10, 11 years ago, we now have employees that have been brought up in an age where not only do they understand this technology, they're hungry for it, they want to
Hmm.
use it. So I think it's time to embrace that, even if it's in little bits and pieces, like Tahir said. We can work on the data maturity and the digital acumen of the workforce, but if you wait for perfection, we're never going to achieve any type of progress in the federal government.
I want to pull a string on something you said a few minutes ago too, Brian, and you talked about the components of financial management systems and projects, acquisition, procurement, and supply chain, all being very similar at the root.
Mhm.
What's the implication of that for building strategies to transform these systems? And what does that mean for when one part of an organization is further along, how they can instruct their colleagues and peers across agencies?
So for us in the government itself, and especially here at SAP, we're really big on the I word, which is interoperability. How do I actually be interoperable across agencies, components, and others? So in the traditional side, we had these proliferation of individual solutions that just weren't there. Now that we can create common data models, we can create, a shared data backbone, we can create repeatable processes. Now I'm able to take what may be working in one organization or agency, take that service, lift it to another. Now not only do I have more buying power for that user, but I also have an accelerated learning curve because the trials and tribulations that may have been felt by a finance customer was felt by someone over here on the other side, and we just accelerate that mission.
Yeah, and to hear that seems to me to be kind of the breakthrough that when an organization learns, it can use the underpinnings from one system that may be a completely different specialty for another aspect of the operations at that agency.
Yep.
That's when you really hit your stride, I guess, from a shared services perspective. Am I on the right track?
100%. It's because the bespoke applications are going away slowly. And so if you have that standards-based architecture, you're able to do that. It's like Lego building blocks now.
Mhm.
So I think the most important thing we have to focus on is continuing to build a community that wants to be collaborative and share. A lot of this is written in white papers, as we mentioned. You have to be able to share. If it's standards-based architecture, there shouldn't be any odd quirks in there or customizations to the point that another agency, branch, or division wouldn't be able to take that. Just configure it a little bit for their needs.
So the two elements then that strike me as maybe the biggest obstacles here are both cultural. One is what you just described, which is we're special, we do it differently, and nobody else, other people's stuff won't work for us, and our stuff won't work for other people. That's the one cultural
Right.
issue that seems to be the most difficult. And then the other is, I guess, that same idea on steroids, which is if it's coming from a completely different agency, I'm not even interested because they're in their mission space and I'm in my mission space. What have you seen to be successful to overcome those objections?
So we actually focus on building those communities, those coalitions that are able to get together and say, hey, just because you are a logistics agency within defense does not mean you're not doing similar things that a logistics agency within civilian would do. And it's working. And they're excited and they're actually sharing best practices. So we hope to continue that education evangelization. We need to do it.
You talked earlier about the hunger
Mhm.
that employees have now in using these technologies. There's a school of thought that as the federal government ages and as OPM introduces concepts like the tech force and tries to bring in younger people, that's part of the underlying benefit that the government will derive is that federal employees will demand more and more cutting edge technologies. What's the best way for an agency to set itself up for success to deliver on that?
Yeah, so I think what you hit on earlier when you talked about the insertion of technology is one thing, but there's really the people and process part of it as well. Generally, what we see and what I really tell folks in that question is when you try to do a big bang implementation of technology in itself, it's just bound to fail. What leaders really need to recognize across the board is what is that business outcome I'm really trying to achieve? What's that tangible delta, measurable impact that I want to get after? Really define that first. Once you do that, you figure out what that measurability is. In the defense side, it could be readiness. In the finance side, it could be auditability. In the supply chain side, it's maintainability, et cetera. Figure that out first. And then that process side we can start to look at. I always looked at AI as and standards as the foundation of what should be look like, what's my common data model, and then use AI as that accelerant to actually make it happen and actually empower that worker to get after thought processes and things like that.
And from a cultural perspective to here, it strikes me that if a leader is able to go to his or her team and say, we're going to deliver this better outcome,
Yeah.
and your job is going to be easier because we adopt this technology, this standards-based technology, and we know part of it already works, and we just have to get used to it in our area, that's going to drive implementation, cooperation, the collaboration that you described earlier. Is that fair
Absolutely.
to say?
Absolutely, it's fair. And I think this younger generation wants to focus on public service. They're excited about mission outcomes. They're not excited about working on an IT project. They're excited about working on a mission critical system. So that's the way we have to entice the younger generation. They also want to have a sandbox of different really cutting edge tools to play with. And we have to be able to provide that for them if we want them to come in and do public service.
Tahera, Brian, it's great to have both of you here. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you much.